is where we can share. Since you get the students to share all the time, let's see how well you like it. You don't really need the copy. I didn't get my copy. Yeah. Okay. Ready to go? Videotape? Good? All right. Thank you very much for staying until the end. This has been a really, for me, an exciting and kind of weird day because I got to hear grammar all day long, which is really good. So it's weird, spelled G-O-O-D. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here as well, and thanks to National Geographic for sponsoring this. I also thank the organizing committee because for those, if anyone even dared to think today, I cannot believe they didn't have a pencil in the bag, or something like that, I invite you to organize something once, okay? So I'll give you a small example. For example, you got free parking passes. Now you take my university, so you think, well, how hard was that to do? They said, Nat Geo said, here's the money, just do it. I don't know what happened, but I can guess what happened at a large university with bureaucracy. At my university, University of Central Florida, second largest in the United States, I can tell you that if our department called over to the police area and said, we want to get 200 passes for people whose names we're not going to write on them, and the dates, we'll fill the dates in, don't worry, that's not going to go over. I don't care how much money you're paying. So somebody had to contact Nat Geo to get this approved, and somebody had to actually get the passes and then get them to you, and then how many people didn't have the right pass today because you're in the wrong area, signs had to go up as to where to park. All this stuff had to happen, and that's just to park the car. So I'm just saying, I really, really, really thank everybody who was involved in organizing this very much. Thank you. Okay, we're going to jump in. I talked kind of fast. I'll try to enunciate carefully. Here we go. So first things first. So today we're doing the topic of integrating grammar with writing and writing with grammar, or doing some writing and then doing some grammar. Call it what you want. So I do want to talk about the fact that writers become better at writing by writing, not by people lecturing. I do lecture, so I get paid to do it. I do know how to organize a paragraph better than you do. I get paid to be able to do it better than you do. I know what an American Western paragraph format essay looks like. That's my job. I don't take them the full 50 minutes and lecture on it 50 minutes because it is a skills class, and you get better at skill by practicing the skill. All right. I'm also a tennis fanatic, and so I always give the example of I can't help you. I taught tennis. I can't help you get a better backhand if you have no backhand. So you need a backhand. You need a bad backhand for us to work on. Well, we have to work on it, and showing you 5 YouTube clips of 5 different people hitting what the British would call a glorious backhand down the line is not going to help you have any backhand down the line, let alone glorious. So you need to be able to have your students actual writing class a lot. And that's a trade-off that's hard for a lot of teachers, whether it's grammar, reading, writing, grammar, the skill. It's how much do I do, how much do I let them do. If I had paid $3,000 to be in this intensive program for X number of weeks, did I really pay money to come sit here and speak with this other guy whose English is worse than mine, right? And every now and then she walks around and then we feign that we're really speaking English again. Here she comes to say something. So one thing I know is that most writing teachers who didn't have training in the teaching of writing, and when I started teaching writing, I had no training. They gave me a book called The Process of Composition and said, go. It's 4th period, do something. And I didn't know what to do. I had no training. I had training in grammar. And I know all of us instinctively would think that writing and grammar have this intricate relationship. You can't do writing without knowing something about grammar. It certainly can't get to a higher level without having better grammar. So it's natural we would cover grammar, grammar, and grammar. And the big danger, of course, is that the writing class becomes just an extension of the grammar class. And that's called writing for a reason. But most teachers do what was done to them. And what was done to us was something like this. A teacher, remember from 8th grade or high school, somebody assigned a topic. You sat there and wrote. At the time, you didn't pay attention to what the teacher was doing. And then you had no idea that the teacher collected the papers and then did number 4 all night. And then the biggest mistake for most beginning teachers, and this takes time to overcome, is between step 4 and 5. So up until then, it's pretty normal. You have to have a topic. I could say write on what you want, in which case you would never go beyond what you can already do. Like I would always write about tennis. And I know the vocabulary of tennis already, and when I find myself in a situation where I can't say what I want to say, I will just go around it and say it a different way. But I'm going to talk about tennis in the essay. I'm not getting any better, except going around it maybe. But I'm not going to give clauses. Well, let's just skip that, okay? I'll just use maybe a whole lot. Maybe one day I will win. Maybe one day, maybe one day. All right, so between that step 4 and 5, a lot of teachers, and I was this way when I first started teaching, I would go home on Monday with a stack of papers, and my Tuesday classes depended 1,000% on my ability to grade papers on Monday night. And that's certainly doable. I joke, you've heard me say this many times before, but the Law and Order is on for 3 hours on Monday night. You can actually watch that. It's okay. Grading those papers or marking the papers, there's no research showing that the amount of ink you expend or the amount of time you do, or whether you make lines or check marks or smiley faces or use red or green or purple or whatever color you want to do. There's no research showing that whatever you think you just did actually mattered to anybody. And it mattered in a real way. I'm not saying, don't misquote me, I'm not saying don't mark papers. I'm just saying that marking papers, don't confuse, it's practice for you at marking papers. That's what you get better at. That's what's being improved here, right? Unless you return papers and students have to do something with what you've done and not just notice it like, yeah. I mean, I would do the story, true story. I remember the girl from Venezuela sitting in the desk, University of Southern Mississippi, way back when, and it was one of those desks you could rock back. The whole desk would come up, she's on the back to it. She's rocking this desk back, chomping on her gum, I remember, and I passed the paper back, and I made all kind of marks on this paper the night before. And I thought, when I saw the paper, oh wow, this is that paper I spent 22 minutes making the marks on. She's going to so appreciate this, right? Passed the paper back, and I remember she saw it had a C plus or something. Okay, C plus, folded it up, stuck it in the book. Note to self, keep Folse. Maybe you could have watched a third of an episode of Law and Order. Right? So that's what we do, and that's collectively what we're sort of up against, where I do teacher training, I do teaching of how you could approach writing. I don't think anyone has the secret of how to teach any of this, to be honest. The research is all over the place, and I'll talk about that in a minute, especially with grammar. But for writing, this is the way most of us do it, because it's what was done to us. That's not a good reason. Short history of grammar. So let's just divide it into 3 chunks, because I've been teaching since about 1978. So before 1980-ish, 100% grammar. You have one called grammar translation. Okay. Pattern practices, the patterns were grammar. Pronunciation practices, they were the patterns of grammar that you were pronouncing. There was no writing class. I'm lucky enough to have taught using the audiolingual method. 56. Okay, and I got in the tail end of a program where they were using audiolingual, and I know that people now young people that I train, they say, what's the audiolingual method? Sheepishly, that was the method that was not good because they've memorized it, out of chapter 6 in their book, and it's always on a timeline, something they did back in the dark ages, and they didn't know any better, as if we know so much better now. So in this case, no, the audiolingual method, it wasn't bad. What was bad was that you did 4 hours of the same thing and nothing else, ever. But there was a class on grammar, one on pronunciation, one on speaking, pattern practices, if you will. And I remember when we transitioned to, there were 2 brand new classes, one called reading and one called writing. And that was revolutionary. Now, to show you also, for those who can't remember this, I remember when they introduced the idea of pair work. You did not do pair work in class. Why? You paid money to be here in an intensive program. Why would you turn to someone that's worse than you, right? So, I remember the first workshop was in Japan, and they were doing a workshop on pair work and group work. It was one of those jigsaw, remember the jigsaws? You know something, and I know something, but we have to share the information, right? And they asked at the end of the session, any questions? And I'm serious, this was my question. Hand went up. If we do this, if I understand what you said correctly, won't they talk? Because I'm trying to show you the paradigm was the teacher taught and you filled in your blanks, which we're still doing, so don't laugh too hard, okay? I'm just saying historically all these things happen for a certain kind of reason. So before 1980 it was all about grammar, because that's all you have. The 80s and 90s, you know, zero. This is bad. We can't do that. And of course, it happened with the natural approach. And allow me to talk disparagingly, as our adverb today, of this. I remember going through this. I survived the natural approach because you could not admit that you taught grammar. And I'm dead serious. You could not. But why? Well, the natural approach. Why did this come along? It makes sense because all this. Let's go back. When it was at 100%, people were not learning these foreign languages. And now we've seen comprehensible input in French and Spanish classes, but the increase in Spanish speakers in the United States is not because of 8th grade Spanish, it's because of immigrants, okay? So, I don't see a lot of French speakers or German speakers as a second language suddenly because you've now had communicative whatever, and you can't argue, well, it's new and we don't know. No, you've had 2 decades to how nice and fancy this was. No, I vote no. So, and also during the whole time, the students kept asking questions. Why is there an ing there? I thought we already studied ED. You said it was past, and now we have worked. How can you put have? Adult learners want to know why. You can't avoid this. And I think if I didn't have learners who want to know why, I would be really disappointed because there's no. That's learning, right? You learned A. And it's all good. They can do the fill in the blanks, times 1,000 until you introduce B, and that, whoa, I thought it was A. Now it's. So what's the difference? That's the light bulb you want to go off. What's the difference between these two? And you need to know what the difference is before that question gets asked. So I'll just say this: in the 80s and even to the early 90s, this was bought. Hook, line, and sinker, the natural approach. I'm going to argue for the unnatural approach. There's nothing natural about having 20 adult learners spend 5 hours a day in a classroom. The fact that it's not natural doesn't mean bad. It just means it's not natural. All right? Comprehensible input. No, I like when they can't understand what I'm saying. Lower your affective filter. Have you ever gone into class? I'm going to scare the hell out of you. It just. But, and then also, learning and acquisition, I'm doing research now. Some of you may know a book I did called Vocabulary Myths. How many of you have dealt with the Vocabulary Myths book? So it started a whole series with the University of Michigan Press, and there's listening myths and reading myths, etc. I did the first one, the Vocabulary Myths book, and I'm working now diligently, but difficultly, not a word. Why don't we have that one? On the grammar myths, because it's just really hard to find research that actually speaks to these things. This book is not about, as a vocabulary myths book, if you read it, it's not about what I think or any one person thinks. It's about what we know, all right? And this learning and acquisition, learning is what's explicit knowledge, and acquisition when you go, wow, and then we pretend as if these are 2 separate animals that just can't possibly be in the same cage at the same time ever, and that what's the threshold that pushes you from one to the other? More importantly than having taught ESL over the years, I have been a student, Spanish naturally. I mean, I was sat in the classroom for 2 years, picked up enough, but I used to hang out with Latinos and had my vocabulary notebook where I was an aggressive hunter of vocabulary. I don't mean like cat, dog. I mean idioms, whole chunks of phrases. Repeat that phrase. Because I was aggressive about, I want to know this stuff. And I got really good at Spanish. My thesis dealt with not linguistics, but it was lexical differences in Honduras, El Salvador, and Nicaragua. Kind of compartmentalized there, okay? I get really good at Spanish is my point, okay? But I also was good at noticing things. And one thing that sticks out in my head was this learning acquisition. Okay, there's a rule, and I learned the rule because but I also, as a savvy consumer, like, they teach this rule, and I would say, yeah, I don't think I'm going to need that one, okay? Yeah, I don't know, thank you. Or I already have another way to say that. I don't need if clauses. I just say maybe a whole bunch. I'm good, okay? So with the learning acquisition, no one really knows what pushes people over the magic line when you can do this naturally. I can think of several examples in my own language learning of Spanish, French, Japanese, Arabic, Malay, German, where it just happened. And here's an example. Some of you have heard the stories before. I'll give you one that you haven't heard before. I was invited when I was in Japan, and how many have lived in Japan? Okay, so it's difficult to mix with Japanese people to the point where you're really speaking Japanese all the time, etc. You have, true friends. It's a long story, all this mess, etc. But I was invited in Japan to go speak at a Japanese wedding. Japanese wedding is a huge social event. It's the coolest thing ever. It's an event. I don't mean a wedding. It's a show. Okay, okay? It's I've been to a Japanese wedding. It's just the coolest thing. I was invited to be one of the 10 speakers. I was so nervous because it had to be in Japanese. I didn't speak Japanese. I had like 2 classes of Japanese, So I wrote in English what I wanted to say, got people to translate it, got them to put phrases that were easier for me to say, and it was all written in Romaji, in the English alphabet letters. So if it said like the word is, Korewa, this is, I wrote not Korewa, but Kore-WA. And then the night before I thought, I can do this. And I got someone to redo it in hiragana for me. Not a good plan, all right? So the next day, I was so nervous. All my Japanese friends kept saying, don't worry, you'll be the only foreigner. I've been invited because I'm a novelty. I'm a novice. I mean, I'm like the flavor of the day, And they said, don't worry, but what number speaker are you? I said, I'm number 8 of 10. They said, they'll all be drunk by then. do not worry. And so I'm getting ready to go up with, oh my gosh, a speech in Japanese. And so I got up, and then you could hear a pin drop. They all shut up. They all went quiet because the foreigner is going to speak. I gave my speech, and I had put in the pause, like, this is what you just said, this reminder. And then I was saying all these, I knew the groom, he was one of my students. One of the worst students ever. Let's just say one of the least motivated in the group, okay? I wrote his thesis. How's that? So, in this case, he gets it. So I get to give the speech. He's just great and glowing, and Mayumi is so lucky, and blah 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 and on. And the audience at this point was kind of they were kind of giggling and laughing because like, do you know this person, right? And so in Japanese, the way you do the passive voice, there's like kaite means writing, ing, and then you say kaite iru means he is writing, and to change the iru to aru, the other be verb, it ends up being it has been written. But I hadn't studied. I studied the grammar of that, and they're all sort of laughing. And I like to make jokes, and so I just said kaite aru. It has been written this way. That's why I'm saying it. And they all burst out laughing. And like, oh my goodness! I just did the te aru form. How did that happen? Well, here's how it didn't happen. Through natural input of 6 years of whatever, I thought, I think I sort of noticed. No, I didn't notice it at all. No, we did fill in the blanks times 1,000, and at the time, I thought linguistically, grab what you can. I'll give you another example. In Japanese, they have a grammar point. It's the loose translation. ing, doing. Okay? And it means things like, I'll give you some examples in English. The price of gasoline has been going up and down like crazy. He was pacing back and forth. During the storm, the lights kept going off and on. It's that fluctuating thing. They have a grammar point for that. And I was in the Japanese intensive program, and they taught us that grammar point. And I'd been in Japan probably 3 years at that point, in the boonies, where it was mostly happening in Japanese, around me anyway. And I remember thinking, now lady, we don't use that. I've been here 3 years. I've never heard this grammar point. Okay. I went home, and being diligent, I'm doing my Japanese homework, sitting on the floor in my cramped little apartment. I had the TV on in Japanese, thinking osmosis will take effect here, right? So I was trying, and they were in Kyoto for the National Sumo Wrestling Championship, and they said, Kyoto, today we're here in Kyoto, and that part I got, blah, 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 sumo wrestling, blah, 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 2 people, blah, blah, blah. And then suddenly they said, and the person said, and the weather today, tenki, well, I know tenki, I know that one. And then they said, amega, futuri, yanduri, the rain is starting and stopping. In other words, it's been raining off and on all day. And I remember I got it. And you know how I got it? Because of noticing. Because in class, I think what we're trying to do in a lot of our ESL classes, it's not teaching for mastery. You can't possibly get any of these things just like that, or else you wouldn't have a job. It's like it harder than that, right? So in this case, I'm teaching these points that when you go out in the real world and see it in print or hear it, and that is your job. That's not a Folse job. Because you're in an intensive situation. If you didn't want to hear English, you'd be in an EFL situation somewhere else. But I'm doing my job. Your job is to be exposed to English outside of class. If you choose not to do that, that's not my issue. But my job is to teach these salient points, and then when you go notice, when you're exposed to English, you're much more likely to notice them. And a lot of research on this, the power of noticing. All right, yeah. No, not really. I don't think so. And there's no evidence for any of this, but people just kept repeating it. People in second language acquisition who would criticize Dr. Krashen, but the number one thing was none of these things were testable. Like, what is I plus 1? What is I? Kind of. I-ness, whatever. Well, what would our experiment look like with the 60 people? They each have 60 I-nesses. You can't do that. It's not testable. But everybody bought into it. When I taught in Japan, a really good university where that student was and didn't write the thesis, people's grammar was so weak, and I went to the chair and said, we've got to add a grammar component here. And he listened, and he said, I kid you not, a lot of people in this program graduated from the University of Hawaii. They're a prestigious program, and it certainly is. He said, I can't possibly ask them to teach grammar. Historically, that made total sense in 1988. Total, all right? And so finally, he relented and let me have a grammar class, which competed with lunch. So you had lunch, or couldn't call it grammar, it was AD. AD class, accuracy development. Okay? I'm just trying to show you, for those who weren't there, you could not even use the word grammar. All right, so there's what it is. Nowadays, yeah, okay, maybe so. But again, for that book I'm working on, Grammar Myths, I'm looking at the research on this. I don't see a lot of research, known as almost none, supporting the fact that if you teach grammar, you get a certain kind of result on day 1 or on day 21. That's not a reason not to teach grammar, but it is something that we all need to take into account when we're trying to discuss this intelligently with somebody who's of the other persuasion that grammar doesn't matter. Just because there's no evidence of it doesn't mean, it's hard to measure these things. I'll talk about this in a minute though too. So today's talk is grammar for writing, but I want to show you what grammar for speaking might look like. So before we identify what grammar for writing would be, often an easy way to teach you A is to show you what A is not. So here are some examples of grammar for speaking, 4 of them. One is contractions, right? Now, where am I going? I want you to imagine a grammar book that was called Grammar for Writing, and it didn't have contractions taught in there at all in the book. Because why would you need them? Unless it were in the back of the book on page whatever that said, avoid these 20 common writing mistakes. Number 1. Because a lot of people actually, and this is a native speaker issue, they write the way they speak. And that's when you get the gunnas and the shouldas, or should of, OF kind of thing, right? Contractions. And then, yes, see the contraction you live with. Here's one, oh, now I don't feel so comfortable with this. So yes, no questions. When would you use a yes, no question in writing? Well, you could do it in an essay, because you could open it with one of those rhetorical questions. But how many essays, if you were going to write 10 essays right now, how many of your 10 essays would begin with a rhetorical question, which is certainly possible? Let's be generous and say 1. I'll go and say 2. So now that you got 2, and this is one small piece of your whole essay, and your essay is full of other kind of mistakes. So since I only have X amount of hours and 2 hands, and Lord, what do I want to watch tonight? Given all those different things, what's the best hand I can play on these cards that have been dealt, right? And so something has to be cut so that you can focus your time and energy and the student's time and energy on something else. So yes, no questions wouldn't be it. Now, right now you say, well, these are minor things. Let's get to something bigger. An independent clause followed by a dependent information. Give an example. What's something you might see in an essay? The government repealed the law because the population was outraged, which won't happen. But in this case, the government repealed the law because people were outraged. So that's normal in conversation. Conversation and in writing, in English we like the main stuff up front, followed by all this extra decoration stuff, which would be, in this case, dependent clauses or prepositional phrases, for example. But if you begin your sentence with, say you have something that has because blah, 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 comma, independent clause, that's probably more likely to occur in a piece of writing than in spoken language. Although it certainly could occur. I'm not saying it can't. So I'm trying to identify structures, grammar points, pieces, structures that would be more common in writing. So I always teach my students it's the idea of fronting. So you already have these sentences that have, one issue is let's include all those and becauses and ifs and whens and whatever, unlesses in our sentences. Once we've got that used, here's a way to make your writing sound a little bit more writing-like. Take that chunk of the dependent stuff, move it to the front, put a comma after it, get rid of the capital letter followed by the comma. Make sure that what's after the comma is a main idea there. That's the main key thing for the reader, because you're not writing just for the heck of it, you're writing for a reader. And then you have now a sentence that looks more like writing, okay? Although, blah, 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 no one in conversation says, well, I thought you were going to go to the mall and buy that blue shirt. Although I went to the mall, although many shirts were available, the sale, but it reeks of writingness, all right? How about this one, though? The word though. I want you to pay attention for the next 24 hours since I've got this, I'm going to raise your awareness of this. Notice how often though occurs in spoken language and where it occurs. Now in your textbooks, in the grammar book, the though lesson would be in the same place where although is, pretending that although, though, and even though are exact synonyms, and they're not. The difference is really not that big either, but they're not. But it fits nice to have it in page 97 in one chart, and there they all, they're alphabetized. All those at the top, those down the bottom, not even touching each other, right? So it turns out, true story, when I was teaching in Japan, it was a language academy, my second job for 4 years, and we had English, and then French, Spanish, Chinese, lots of languages, and we had a French teacher there, Nadine, who spoke English well, but with the nice French accent of the z's and z's and kind of stuff. And I remember one day she kept asking me, she stopped the meeting, she says, Keith, what is this dough? I hear dough. You keep talking about dough. Now I'm from New Orleans where THs are Ds, so yeah, maybe it's a little, I don't know. But no, what she heard in her French ear was, I'm not going to do that though. Because she asked about though, and I said, no, we don't. Again, I didn't know the idea of corpus linguistics in your brain, but I mean, anytime you search for a sentence in your head, you're doing corpus search. The corpus happens to be what's in your head at that point in your life. But in this case, I thought, no, we don't use though. Though is a really fancy word. It's like though, blah, blah, blah. We don't say that. And then in the meeting, the assistant director asked me something, and I turned and said, yeah, we still have to do that though. So that's it. And it was the first time I noticed, or I was made aware of that some things that occur in spoken language that just don't occur in writing. You wouldn't write the word though at the end of a chunk of a sentence unless you were actually writing a novel or trying to do creative writing, or it's a diary, something like that. So these are some examples of spoken language. And there are lots of others too. Michael McCarthy is the person who writes the most about this, I think in the best way that it's actually understandable and it's not trying to impress you. It's actually just giving you really good examples of what you read and go, yeah, that's true, I hadn't thought about that a lot. So when we talk about grammar in a speaking class, I think most teachers don't really have this list in their head. They think, oh yeah, if clause, no, it's the same list you had from the grammar class. It's not the same. There's massive overlap. It's not a separate grammar, but there are several things that occur only, or traditionally in speaking, and there are many things that occur only in a writing class, or only in writing and not in spoken language. So my first writing class, they handed me that book, What Do I Do? And all these questions I had, and it came down to this: what do I do in class? What do I do after class besides Law and Order, and what do I do before class? Okay. And on these questions, this is a list you can read through. Everybody's got tons of different questions. Should I do this? Should I do that? Well, I don't know what you should do. It depends on your learners. Are they trying to be able to write an academic essay next week? Then that's a different scenario than they just want to be able to write something like a journal entry. Or are they science students where they're going to write science experiment reports where they don't want any citations in it. We just want to know what you did, and we don't want any I's or we's or you. That's basically, the professor doesn't know the terminology. What he's saying is use passive voice a lot. But the point is, no one can answer this question. Only you can answer this question because no one knows your students better than you do. And for me, always I say, learner needs drive the show completely. All right? So, what do we teach? And what we're going to look at here are two things. Here you're going to work with a partner for about 5 minutes. And so, I think it's got a 1 and a 2. Yeah. I thought I had that slide. I'm going to go one more in case it pops up with the answers. Okay. Here's what I want you to do. As a pair or three, really quickly, pick one of these. Things we teach in a grammar course, and I'm thinking of an upper, at my school we have 4 levels, so it's our level 3, our upper, intermediate, lower, advanced class. What are 10 grammar points that you definitely would cover in the grammar class? And if you don't want to do grammar, do the writing. In the writing course, on the right-hand side, I'm not asking you to list grammar points. I don't want 10 grammar points on the right-hand side. You can list some grammar things if you want, but for example, you probably cover hooks, how to have a hook in an essay. How to cite things, all right? So if you do about 4 minutes or so working with a partner, take left side or right side and make a list really fast there. Good luck, everybody.
level that you already know, tenses and aspects.
Sorry?
Tenses and aspects.
Tenses and aspects. Okay. Pretty traditionally, you do a review of verb tenses at that level. You know, because most of them, many have, maybe not most, but many have been covered already. But it's sort of a consolidation. What else? What's sorry? Modals. Do modals. Okay. And then modals, I would, as a textbook writer or a curriculum planner, I would ask, do you mean like modals, the regular modals like can, could, should, or are you getting into the past modals, the could have, should have, must have? Okay. What else? Passive voice, conditional adjective clauses, noun clauses. I'll show you what for the writing part. What do you teach in the writing part? So I said hooks. Sorry? The writing process, the thesis statement, transition words, how do you get a topic that you're actually going to write about?
Brainstorming ideas, organizing ideas.
Organizing ideas. Okay, I'll show you what I put up. There is not the correct answer. Here's an answer. So I listed these grammar points: passive voice, adjective, reduction, gerunds, infinitives, blah, blah, blah. We done the past modals. And then on the writing side, because I tried to have 10 and 10, I actually only had 8, and I had to fudge a little bit to put some other things in there. But grammar ends up being the number 10. But I think if we hadn't been in this session today, and I just started with the right-hand side and giving you 10 blanks, a lot of people would interpret this as filling in with 3 or 4 grammar points. And I find it really hard to think that any one verb tense is as important as editing your paper, or is as important as how to cite things or something like that. Now these are not the magic answers, but these are just possibilities here. So it's interesting to know what they look like separately. You can't talk about integrating the skills if you don't know what they are separately. And I also give thanks to the fact that when I first started teaching that very first program, there were 5 hours a day of completely discrete skills classes. Now I go, oh my gosh, it was discrete skills. That's not a problem. The grammar class covered grammar. It was covered. The reading teacher covered reading. The writing teacher, where the class it's writing and grammar, a lot of times what will happen is that the teacher doesn't know grammar very well, then grammar gets to be the minority there, for sure. And we do a lot of writing. It happens in college, even in freshman comp. Freshman comp, where do you learn grammar if you're a native speaker? Supposedly in freshman comp, but in freshman comp, you're mostly literature trained, and that's what you do. You get a lot of literature. Because I was told this was my argument, I said, well, if you read a lot, you'll get better at the language. Well, you've got to college and you still can't put the verbs together in the right way. I don't know if one more semester is going to do it. Right? So, why do ESL teachers focus on or harp on, depending on whether you're CNN or Fox, which your angle's going to be here, okay, with grammar so much? And here's some of the answers. Well, you can't ignore grammar. They're saying in a session I did earlier how the speaking teacher allows a lot of mistakes to happen. You don't correct every single mistake when the person speaks. Well, whereas with writing, because it's on a piece of paper and it's right there, we feel this compulsion or this need to correct every single thing, because that's worked out so well for us so far, right? But I think that in speaking, if someone is speaking, people make mistakes, and you correct ones that impede meaning, or you correct ones that are actually really egregious, bad mistakes, okay? But you do allow many things to pass because it's happening so fast, all right? And some of the things you allow to pass are just things that make this person have an accent, right? So if my friend Nadine is French speaker, she routinely does the Z's for the THs. So this and that and these and those, it's part of what makes her a French speaker. And at some point she decides, I want to get better, if it's considered better for her. Or maybe she wants to stay with that because it helps her identify who she is as a French speaker, learning English, blah, blah, blah. Different talk, right? But the point is, we allow students to speak with an accent. I think you should allow people to write with an accent. And all that means is there's going to be a certain amount of stuff that you're just not going to worry about. Prepositions. I don't care how many, there's no magic way to do it, okay? I can teach you combination, so if the word is tired, it should be tired of, not tired at, and not tired within or with or by, or it's tired of, something like that. That's the combination. That's a different preposition from knowing that you say, in all honesty, why in? And why all? We don't have in some honesty, or in no honesty. Why all? Those are some of the things that are taught item by item. It's more a lexical issue than a grammar point. All right. Second thing is that the ESL teachers, you are the most qualified to explain these things, to explain them away, and they don't go away, but to explain them. And I say this because when our students get moved on to the freshman comp teachers, who usually are not prepared to handle why I enjoy to go to the store. They just circle it and write awkward or prove your paper better. That's not going to help. And you can't explain why there's an ing there either, can you? All right. And then the danger, of course, is what I said earlier, you turn the writing class into that. Now, what I'm going to show you is, everybody got a copy of a handout. So here's what we're going to do today. I'm going to ask you to look at, now for those who heard me speak at TESOL, we're doing something a little bit different, so I tried not to repeat the exact same thing. So we're going to look at a paper that some ESL students wrote, but not from their head, not like my favorite vacation. This is where you have to read, more like college, you have to read something and then write about that thing. And not like, I like the movie because it was good, right? You actually have to have critical thinking skills here and interact with this material and show citations. So it's two different assignments. What the ESL students had to do, I had two of them, they read an article from this work and they had to write about it. And here are the ESL issues. So the single parents. In this article, so-and-so with so-and-so is very interesting, minus 100 already. Because you've got, what's the verb here? It is. So when I do teacher training, in my experience with different foreign languages, some people aren't very good, also native speakers, aren't very good at finding the subject. But most people are really good at finding the verb. So I always start with, we're going to analyze any sentence. We never do left to right. I always say, does it have a verb? Yes. What is the verb? Is. Who or what is interesting for all of us? There's nothing here, right? Because there's no subject, because there's a rule that object of a preposition, and now we can only do one thing. Either it's going to be the object of the preposition or it's going to be the subject, but not both. We're a little bit stronger than that in English. So in this case, article can't be it, focus on the family can't be it, Dobson can't be it, so you have no subject. So I heard several people today say, I don't understand, or one thing we complain about is our students get these really good grades in grammar, writing, reading, whatever, and then they get onto the integrated kind of class and they don't do well. Well, one reason is most ESL teachers will take this sentence and you'll mark, subjects missing, blah, 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 and what's the penalty? No penalty. This paper will end up getting a B+ because she tried really hard, or I know her, and she's had to overcome so many. No, it's not caring and sharing for the planet. This paper is going to be passed eventually to this paper. The paper you have is from a freshman, from a second semester college writing course, okay? Written by a native speaker. This is the standard. So what my message today is that what we look for as ESL teachers is biased toward missing a gerund, wrong preposition, whereas the freshman comp person, and that's the person who matters here. I mean, we matter. We know we matter, okay? But in the grand scheme of things, I'm not the gatekeeper. The gatekeeper is this person. And all of our students, when I say learner needs, they don't need, no one, I think I want to learn ESL grammar. No one takes a class to learn ESL grammar. They take it in order to do something else. And that something else, that's the gatekeeper, right? The gatekeeper in this example is the paper you have in your hand. I will tell you that the paper in your hand was written by a native speaker. The assignment was in the second semester of freshman comp, our 1120 course at my university. And unlike the first course is about just writing, where you write from your head, what your own ideas and express yourself better, people critique each other's writing, etc. But this paper, they actually have to read something as a class, so you can't not cite it, and you can't fake the teacher off by giving misinformation, because everybody has read the same article. You also have to go do a field research project, and then you have to write about write about the topic, write about your project, introduce all of this, give the results, and then summarize it. That's a real writing assignment. Not write about 5 paragraphs about your favorite vacation, or compare should the hospital be built here or not, kind of thing. So in this one, if the student does this and they get a B+ on this paper, then it is no surprise it should be no surprise down the road that the transfer is not happening here. And there's no penalty for it. So you just tell them add a subject or whatever, and then they got a B+. I have certain kinds of mistakes that I just don't tolerate after it's been taught in practice. Fragments. The people who do this, the freshman comp people, know what fragments are. They're not keen on certain verbs are followed by gerunds. That's more of an ESL play. But they really know what fragments are. So, and run-ons and comma splices. So that's one of the ones that in the advanced writing classes, when I teach it, becomes one of those heavy penalties. If you turn a paper that has a whopping 137 words on it, and it's your final draft, and you've got one of those in it, that's an F. It's an F. Because either you don't know what you're doing. Now, I'm not being, some grammaraholic here with superimposing hard rules. I'm just saying there are certain ones that you can't make anymore because you, passing level 4, and that's the question, will you pass the course and get an A? You're supposed to know that. And if you can't police yourself for, does every verb have a subject? And how does it not have a subject? Because the nouns are the object of a preposition. It can't get any easier than that at the level 4. Shame on you. All right? Or in the South where I'm from, bless your heart. So. Now, the next one, the single parents is. Sorry, we already got an F already from the first one, but showing you that it's consistent. And then the second paragraph, the responsibilities for single parents are more difficult than 2 parents who are live. We don't do that. There's not an M, there's R plus the base form of the verb. Again, I chose this one because it has 2 or 3 mistakes that for me are just not passable. 0. And you think, well, you're being really harsh and blah, blah. You know what? If they get an A or B in your class, you're giving a false message here, because when they get to this person, they're going to say, writing center. They go to the writing center. The writing center tutors they don't edit papers. They've been told not to edit. They deal with the bigger picture. This paper doesn't have a bigger picture problem. It deals with nuts and bolts of junk that you're not supposed to be doing, okay? All right, let's try another one, because that one was so good. All right, in this article, wow, someone, we don't know who, but someone asked so-and-so to talk, please talk, and explain the difficulties which single parents are facing every day. Dr. Dobson believed, show is over. The first one, article, okay, you'll see the native speaker paper made some mistakes like that. I think you'll get a green wavy line for that one, though, if you got it set right. And that would have told you, but Dr. Dobson believed, no, because this paper mentioned Dr. Dobson several times. So this is not, you can't chalk it up to what was the one time it occurred in the paper, the other 87 times it was right. It doesn't matter. The gatekeeper will freak out in English, because in English, a subject, verb, third person singular, without the S, has meaning for us sociolinguistically in our society, right? It's the equivalent of it don't matter. It certainly doesn't reek of academic writing, right? So it's going to get you in trouble. The native speakers who write like that will get in trouble. So I have to hold everybody to the same standard, just as this person will hold everybody to the same standard. And I think that what the professors just understood is a cop-out. If I'm going to Bulgaria to write a thesis in Bulgarian, it is my obligation to be able to write at whatever level is required to do the thesis, or pay someone to write this paper and clean my paper up before I submit it. All right? I'm not going to depend on the Bulgarian professor. It's me, not you. So, so why would you integrate? A couple of different reasons here. Why would you even bother putting grammar in the writing class? Well, one is to avoid mistakes. That's the number one ESL teacher, because they make so many mistakes. The other way would be a positive thing, because I don't know how to say that in English. The example I always give is this. Imagine that I have this is not an example you'd find in an essay. I'm going to talk about a bottle of Diet Coke. but I have a bottle of Diet Coke sitting here, and someone asks me a question, and when I turn, my elbow hits the bottle of Coke, and it starts to fall, but everybody in the audience gasps, because you see the liquid going along the machinery, and then I caught it, though, so it didn't spill. So I want to write a sentence and say that, the audience gasped because the Diet Coke bottle was
Nearly not good.
was nearly to, or was about to. All right, let's go. All possible ways. Let's use the word almost. The bottle of Diet Coke almost past tense, but it didn't happen. So why do you put it in past tense? Well, because the almost happening was in the past. That's clear, right? So in languages like Spanish and Japanese, that would be in present tense. It'd be in the base form of the verb because it didn't happen. It's viewed as incomplete. Perfect and imperfect. Happened or didn't happen. But the point is, if you don't know how to say that, or how to write that, because you don't know how to say it, that's why you aren't writing it that way. It's not happening because, number one, it was an error. I just don't know how to do that. So sometimes, number two, and we don't do enough of this, is teaching people how to write something in order to say an idea that you don't know how to say. I'll give you a better example. Back in that paper, where was the one about the comparison one? Was it here? Yeah, sorry, here. This one, the last one, are more difficult than two parents who are the responsibilities for single parents are more difficult than two parents. It's a faulty comparison, right? See, that's a good example of not number one. I know it's a mistake, but it's probably number two is why it's happening. They don't know how to do parallel comparisons. So it's not a mistake because they knew it and made a mistake. I would guess it's a mistake because you've never practiced how to do that. That's number two. And then the third reason I would say is to make your paper sound more whatever you're trying to do, more academic, more genre-specific, audience-appropriate, or make it sound more normal statistically. And what I mean by normal here is that if we were to give the same assignment, because we're trying to get the freshman comp with native writers with the same assignment, what would their papers look like? What's the difference between the native paper and what your ESL students would do with the same assignment? And in ESL, I think we don't go back in the early 80s, you would see papers like that. There were research papers like that, but it's just not a sexy thing anymore. People don't do this kind of analysis, unfortunately. But that's what we should be doing, I think, for the needs analysis. It's not how well they mastered the grammar syllabus that we've had since 1685, but how well does your paper, can you do this? And if you can't do this, can I help you produce something that looks close enough to it where they're not going to send you to the writing center, or they're not going to proof your paper over and over. So here's what I want you to do. You have a paper here, and what we're going to do first of all is look at verb tenses and verbs. So you have the paper, and if you would number the paragraph, I think there are 3 paragraphs. The bottom piece is not a brand new paragraph. I tried to squeeze it all on one sheet to save a tree, and if you put it in the footer, it automatically indents on the computer I have today. Let me give you an example. I'm going to show you what I'm looking at. Look at the very last sentence here. I'll say the last 2 sentences. You see where it begins with next? Look at this sentence. Next, I put on my one-piece bathing suit, grabbed my goggles, and headed to the pool deck, period. That's when the confusion began. That's a really powerful pair of sentences. What makes that first sentence look like really good writing? There are 3 things. In English, at least in our culture, things happen in threes a lot. And it's much more than you would imagine. Notice, I said this in Toronto, but notice when you're a politician, why do you believe we should not have gun movement? Well, there are 3 main reasons. And they only give you one. But it doesn't matter, because when you finish, your perception is, wow, she was really well organized. So she knew what she was talking about. Why? Because she had 3. Right? It's this thing that there were 3 guys in the bar, never 4, never 2, right? Think of how many times 3 is a really important number for us. So in this case, the fact that you've got, first of all, now as a grammarian, I go, wow, you have 3 parallel structures. You could have done subject, verb, comma, subject. Well, first there are commas there. Let's go back to level 1. But you've got subject. You don't have subject, verb, comma, subject, verb, comma, subject, verb, although you could have done that. You've got subject, verb, comma in the right tense. Same verb tense, comma, and the same verb tense again. And there are 3 of them. And then it's followed by this short little piece, which really, that's sort of our line of thinking. It was a blah, blah, blah. And then she did. And that resonates. If I said, once upon a time, blah, 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 you start telling a fairy tale, and it resonates a certain way with you. These sentences are really powerful. I don't see us having our students practice writing that, because we're so fixated on you didn't add the ed in, which should have gone or will have done or whatever it is. Anyway, what I'm saying with this activity is not looking at grammar in that number one way, which is looking to find mistakes, but trying to analyze what grammar is being used here and how likely are your students to be able to do this. So there are 3 paragraphs, 1, 2, and 3. And working with a partner, pick 1, 2, or 3. Just pick one and then go through and identify the verb phrases that have been conjugated and identify the verb tense. If it's a modal, put modal. If it's like can go, that's modal. If it could have gone, that's a past modal. So you got the 12 verb tenses plus modal and past modal. You're on your own for about 4 or 5 minutes there. Pick one paragraph. Go for it. people did paragraph 1? How many paragraph 2? Good people being brave. I thought people would say it's the longest one. I want to skip it. Paragraph 3. Okay, good. Now, what's really cool about this essay, let me give you some background. This is not an essay that I specifically grabbed, this one. A student of mine did her doctoral dissertation research on essays, whole class sets of essays, not handpicked, but take up all the papers of an assignment written by native speakers, and she looked at whether vocabulary in those essays mattered or not, okay? And all these massive correlations of X, Y, and Z, but I helped her out with the statistics and monetarily paying her to run the stats in exchange for the right to have the essays. So I have whole class sets of essays. I taught freshman comp way back, probably in the late 80s, mid 80s, and it was to native speakers, native writers, and it was, that one time I did it at a community college, it was a remedial section. So that tells you what my brain thinks of, what's freshman comp. My point is, I don't know what freshman comp is in 2015, and it behooves all of us to know what that is if that's where your students are going, and not have this kind of generic, well, they kind of do whatever, they use this book. No, what do they really do? What assignments? How many did they write? Do they get to rewrite or not? I'll bet you the classes, they do a lot of what I would consider chit-chat. You talk about the topic a whole bunch, then you write. And some classes we tend not to do that so much because time is of the essence. But if you're going to have the ability, not the ability, but the requirement in the freshman comp course to talk about the topic before you start writing, and that you actually can get a lot of really good ideas from listening to the people around you, meaning Cliff Notes and the people around you may be the way to pass the course, all right? But you need to listen to what they're saying, what we hardly ever talk about in a writing class. You get the freshman comp, and professors complain, College of Business is notorious at my school for complaining they can't take part in group work. They have case studies they have to do. 4 of you are assigned to a case study at random. You don't get to pick your partners. The ESL student often gets the really, bad end of the deal there because 4 Americans get to get, or 3 Americans, chit-chatting 1,000 miles an hour. I was, and he was, and I was like, and she was like. And then the poor ESL student is put into the group and doesn't know how to mix because basically, if we were in Bulgaria, we were the lone non-Bulgarian, and it's all this native language, is how you say like and not like in Bulgarian, is going back and forth. We don't know how to jump in and grab our place on the floor. I'm not even sure what you're talking about, actually. And I don't want to look stupid because I'm embarrassed. My English is not so good. And I don't know how to participate in this game that you're doing, which is the norm in the class. Then the ESL student gets whatever's left over. Or you can make the PowerPoint, or you can do the bibliography kind of thing, right? And then at the end, when students have to write, each student makes comments about the other people in the group, and the ESL students often get written up negatively. And it makes sense to the American student, well, they didn't do things, they didn't do this and this and this. Well, they didn't know how to play the game, if you will, because we didn't practice that, right? But if you don't have the speaking skills to jump in, that's another issue as well. That would be something, for example, the speaking classes maybe should be doing is how to participate in a group project where you have to fight for your space on the team. And if you don't fight for your space, you're going to get to do the PowerPoint, right? So I had these whole sets of papers, and I chose one paper at random. This is one that was chosen at random. All of these are papers that got an A or a B in this course. This was a demanding project. They had to get to read the whole paper. Now, first of all, did you find some mistakes? Sure. There are some mistakes. You know what? They're irrelevant because we're not the gatekeeper, and he got an A or a B. If one of my students got a B, I'd be so happy, all right? By a gatekeeper person, not by one of us that's going to give me an A- for showing up, right? So in this case, the paper got an A or a B, and yeah, there are mistakes. There are run-on sentences, there are misspellings, there's like John Swales is John Swales with an S, not Swale, as it is at one point. Commas appear and disappear. Things like the first sentence, the smell of chlorine hit me, comma, this was real. Yeah, we don't do that. But you know what? It's okay. Because, again, with the great writing series I had with Nat Geo, book 5, my co-author intentionally is a non-ESL tainted person. He's a freshman comp Chaucer person. And I did that because I don't know what happens in freshman comp, and I don't know what they will accept and not accept down in, well, I'm on the 5th floor, there's the 2nd floor, down in the English department, okay? But they accept, for example, they'll accept sentences beginning with but, which drives me up the wall because I'm 56 years old, okay? But people will say, well, I don't understand what's the problem. And these are native writers, teachers, they don't get what the problem is. So my point is, maybe something that I was taught not to do is not a big issue for the people on the 2nd floor. And they are the gatekeepers, so I yield totally. Learner needs. Your need is not to pass this class with me. Your need is to be able to function in this class, and they allow for that. So if you don't know how to do however, use but. It's okay. So, verb tense what? My point is, it's a good paper. So is it perfect? It's not perfect. It was chosen at random, so I didn't intentionally choose this one. But although it would appear that way, because, like for example, that second to last sentence we looked at with A, comma, B, comma, and C, that's really good. That's where I'm trying to get us to go, is look at what the paper has, and maybe those are the things we should be focusing on in terms of student practice. Okay, so the first paragraph, verb tense-wise, what do you find? There's not only one verb tense for the whole paragraph. It's not going to happen. But what's predominant? What happens?